Good morning. I'm Angela Stribling, and welcome to this summit. We've got so many wonderful things to cover today, and I'm so happy that you're here. We're going to have a Q&A. I'd like to get started by introducing our illustrious panel. We have with us today Lee Wellington, Executive Director, Urban Manufacturing Alliance, Madie Brown, Principal and Founder, Chief Storytelling Strategist, Brendier, Ian Callender, Founder, Sweet Nation, Shelley Stewart, Director of Research, Manager, Aspen Institute, Gig Economy Data Hub. Welcome, welcome all of you. Actually, we would definitely like to thank you, all of our presenters, Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership, Think Local First D.C., Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, and of course, Mayor Muriel Bowser. She is the best. And to tell you a little bit about myself, I don't want to take it for granted that you know I'm a television and radio broadcaster. I've been in the DC area for so long. I was born in Buffalo, New York, but I'm an honorary Washingtonian. I consider myself a Washingtonian, and I absolutely love this city. So this is such an important summit. I mean, we're all here, we're gonna learn. I know I've got so much to learn, and it's all for you. So we're gonna have a Q&A session with you as well. I would like to maybe open it up to our panelists. We can ask a few questions. I want to start off by asking, what is the future of creative and gig economy workers? If I can ask that to our panelists. Let's see, who shall we start with? How about Karen Baker?
I can actually jump in there.
Perfect.
Yeah, so the future of the creative and gig economy workers is unknown. I mean, unlike certain industries and subsets of business, there's a huge variable. And I think that's what's unnerving, because we don't really have a dedicated path. So when the question's always posed, we really don't have a true and honest response. You know, we're hustlers by nature, so we'll obviously find a way in a path to success. But you know, without any support or guidance from local government agencies and insurance and things of that nature, it's really too many unknowns. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a solid solution, but it's just that it's a hard question to ask.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard question. I mean, this economy the pandemic has affected everyone, and especially us creatives. You know, you're out there, like you said, you're hustling, and you have to figure it out, which is why a program like this is so important, just to, find out what we can do the next step. Did you want to answer this question as well, Shelley?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and echo what Ian shared in terms of, if there's anything we've learned in the last few months, it's that the future is very difficult, if not impossible, to predict. And on one hand, a lot of gig type work is inherently unpredictable. It was before the pandemic and is especially so now. At the same time, some types of gig work, especially those not requiring a certain skill set, have a very low barrier to entry. And so we see an influx of people pursuing this type of work in such a tough economy. And at the same time, for more specialized work, including creative folks, we are seeing more and more new ways of finding and reaching customers and audiences. And right now, with the necessity of social distancing, that's totally essential. But it's likely, as we do look towards recovery, whenever that is able to happen, that a lot of those technologically mediated ways of working will stick around. And there'll be a mix of those with some more traditional and in-person types of work that we are all eager to see again.
Yeah, all eager, definitely. Thank you so much. Did anyone else want to chime in, or shall we move on?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So I'm Lee Wellington, and I'm the Executive Director of the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. And at first glance, the work that we're doing might not seem all that connected to the gig or creative economy, but a big segment of businesses that we really focus in on are those that are using both a combination of craft and technology to jump into the creative economy. They might call themselves makers, designers, engineers, but they're all producing a physical product for sale. And so in the grand scheme of things, that actually puts them within the manufacturing sector. So we wrestle with this definitional challenge where so many of these businesses, they may not even identify as a business. They might identify as an artist or a designer or a maker first. And so that's your first hurdle when you're trying to actually serve the creative economy, is to actually figure out who it is that you're serving and make sure that those folks self-identify as the very business community that can benefit from the programs that are out there. And then the other thing that I'll point out is that there already had been a vulnerability within creative businesses. LISC, actually, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, just put out a commercial recovery guide that goes through a whole host of strategies for small businesses along commercial corridors thinking about recovery. But one of the things that they talk about, which is not going to be surprising to anybody on this call, is that businesses pre-pandemic only had cash reserves. Small businesses only had cash reserves to support themselves for about a month. And so we're talking about the majority of small businesses. And then a quarter of those firms only have cash reserves for about 2 weeks. And so we had this crisis in resilience before the pandemic. And so we were just sort of one disruption away of so many small business closures. And so I think if there's any big pivotal change that we've seen coming out of this, it's a recognition of the value of planning and ecosystem building to support these creative businesses, both in times of crisis and in times of opportunity. And I'm hoping we can dig into not only the work that's going in from the small business side to build in some of that resilience from the perspective of the business, but also the various community organizations that are trying to now respond or had previously planned for a crisis like the era that we're in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, and you're so right. As a creative myself, I have the same challenges and the same questions. So I'm so glad that we're all talking about this today. So, all right, how about the most effective strategies to drive sales during COVID-19 for the creative economy sector?
I can chime in on that question. So I think the first thing to think about when you're thinking about driving sales is understanding the process and how you can actually move the customer from awareness to an actual making the sale. So before you can actually talk about strategies, you must understand how the sales process works as it relates to connecting with whoever your customer base is. And so one of the things you want to think about is, we call it in marketing, the customer journey, right? So initially, we all want to make the sale, but we don't really think about the process that it takes to actually convert someone. So there's 5 stages and to actually getting a sale. And so the first stage, and where many creatives are stuck at, is the awareness stage. So before anybody can buy anything from you, they must know that you exist. And so there is a process that you go through to create awareness before you can even move someone to the next stage, which is consideration. And so that's the stage in which somebody is actually thinking about, okay, well, I know that you exist. I've seen your offering in the marketplace. And so it's a viable option for me to either purchase whatever your creative product is. And then only when someone is aware and is considering you as an option, then can you make the sale. So the challenge that most creatives find is that they automatically want to move someone to making a purchase when they haven't considered how do you foster that relationship and create awareness in the first place to where you can move them to making that sale. And so after you make the sale, there's 2 more stages in this customer journey. There's the service stage, which is where you actually fulfill whatever your product or service is that you're providing. And there's a loyalty. Ultimately, with any business, our goal really is to get our customers to that loyalty stage so that we know we have built a relationship and a rapport. and where this your customers keep coming back. And I know we all have probably heard of the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your revenue is going to come from 20% of your customers.
That's
So
right.
when you're thinking about driving your sales for your creative business, is actually going to be easier, or thinking about a strategy to actually drive sales is actually going to be easier for you to get reoccurring customers to buy, if you have that, to buy from you, opposed to moving someone from awareness to purchase. And so, especially when you're thinking in COVID, when there are limited access to your customers in many ways that we're all limited in how we can connect with them, sometimes it's best to look at your sales strategy from who am I already servicing, who are already loyal, how can I look at adding value to them in that moment so that I can convert them into sales. And then if you're looking at to identifying, your customer base who you don't know, what is my strategy to move unknown customers or prospects from awareness, building that awareness, to even getting them to purchase. So the core foundation to even establishing your sales strategy is going to be thinking about where the customers in their customer journey and how you can better reach them, and then building a strategy around that, because your strategy around how you connect with your loyal customers or customers you're already servicing is going to be different from the strategy you have for people who don't even know that you exist. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think one of the things that COVID did unveil for us is the importance of really understanding your customer. And I think that this is a pain point that many businesses struggle with, is understanding their customers intimately, where they're collecting the necessary data so that they can meet them where they are. But you can't, drive your customer to a sale if you're not reaching them where they are. So, especially if in COVID you were only connecting with your customers in person, and that has, dissipated. So what are the other ways that you're able to connect with them? So collecting data around building out your customer list, understanding multiple contact means. So not just having the email, we think about, okay, it's important to have an email list, but COVID has also shown us the importance of having, mobile numbers, addresses, or whatever, because you can meet people where they are if they're not originally, in the places where you're used to connecting with them. And I have so much more, but I'll let my other panelists chime in to see if they have anything else to add.
Oh, that was really good. Thank you, Madier. Very, very.
Yeah, that was very solid and accurate. And I think in addition to that, being real, being vulnerable to your customers, like, everybody's feeling the same thing right now. So you don't have to have that body armor, that shows that, yes, we are resilient, but we're hurting right now from a financial stance. One of our locations closed in Southwest, and we actually relocated to Southeast, Sandlot Southeast. Okay. But during that time, we didn't really know what the future held, and we documented it. We took pictures, we did a video, and we shared it with our network so that they can see what we're going through. A lot of people, especially in this market, they don't really know the ins and outs of a true business. They only get the social media side of it, which has its pluses and minuses. But, to really get into the back of house and say, hey, look, we haven't paid our rent in the past 6 months, or we haven't been able to pay our staff and our employees. A lot of the restaurants early on in the pandemic, they were, doing fundraisers and raffles for gift cards and really innovative ways to really let the consumer know that, we're struggling, and it's not that we're expecting a bailout from the local government, but it's still something that shows that we are, real people, and we're dealing with the same problems that they are. So it really does show a sense of emotion when you can tell a story. I mean, storytelling is something that we've been doing for the past 15 years, and it just shows in the content that you see when you visit our physical brick and mortar, or when you see our virtual presence.
Such a good point. It kind of brings you closer to your potential customer. You're saying we're all in this together. You're being vulnerable, and everybody appreciates that, right? Yeah. Just the connection. Yeah. Thanks, Ian. All right. So let's see, who else shall we bring in here? How about Lee?
So I think the one thing I would add is that storytelling is going to be important, not just when you think about your immediate customer base, but also policymakers that may not have a sense of what your business needs are. Pre-pandemic, one of the publications that the Urban Manufacturing Alliance worked on alongside a number of partners was a guide to discovering your maker economy. And one of the things that we really encouraged makers to do was to open up the either physical or metaphorical doors to their business. I think folks in the creative economy tend to be really self-reliant. And so they don't see an obvious need to actually start those conversations with their local elected official. And it doesn't seem like it would drive your bottom line in any way. And so it's hard to prioritize those discussions. But ultimately, if we want to see the sort of affordable space, the capital access, the workforce programming that's going to support these industries, we need policymakers to be tuned into the very legitimate economic development potential of the gig and creative economies. And so to the extent that you can like put in that phone call, make that introduction, tell your story, expose your vulnerabilities, as Ian was saying. I think that can make a real impact, but also showcase what it is that you're doing and how interconnected it is to the larger economic fabric of your city. Particularly when we're talking about making and manufacturing, there is a huge economic payoff because so many of those dollars are staying within the local economy. And these are businesses, when you ask them about their trajectory, they have staying power. They want to build and grow in their home, within their home communities. And so making sure that that gets elevated as we figure out the types of businesses that we're going to really invest in, both today, but also in really positive economic times is critical.
It's good information. All right, Shelley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would, several of the other panelists have brought about the importance of kind of openness and vulnerability about creative professionals' experiences in this time. And I think it's also important to think about the needs and challenges that customer and audience bases are facing right now and sort of lean into that and highlight the ways that creative professionals can meet those needs. We're having lots of people be homeschool teachers for the first time in their life. We're having lots and lots of people experience real loneliness and isolation in a way they never have. And there's room for creatives to meet some of those needs and form community spaces that people are looking for, to provide assistance or tools for new home teachers. And so thinking about the ways that they can bring their skill sets and their talents to all of these challenges we're facing has a lot of potential.
Very, very good. Thank you so much. These are all such great things to think about, as we move forward. So thanks for sharing that. All right, so I have another question. What products or programs have been most successful for manufacturers of color? And I'd like to start with Ian on this one, if I can.
Sure. Actually, I think the Great Streets program is actually a very unique program that focuses and highlights on the Great Street corridors, and those corridors are pretty focused in the urban communities. So your Rhode Island Avenue, your East of the River, MLK, and Good Hope Road corridors, and this is particularly where people of color have access to physical spaces where they can create and make and do beautiful things. It is a very stagnant contrast to other areas in the city where most people are, or at least where most people travel. But when I think about people of color in the manufacturing, I think of your Angel from Spice Suite, and up in Tacoma area. She's doing phenomenal in her area, in her corridor, and she relies on the support from her councilman. And I think from a product stance, it really does make you take a step back and reevaluate, especially in this era. Again, thinking of not just the COVID situation, but the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and really understanding the true climate of people of color. Again, because we are dealing with an extended amount of stress just already being African American or being Black, but now you add a whole, another layer of the social injustice that we're experiencing. So we have seen a huge influx of support for products and really supporting Black businesses, which is great. So the loan aspect of it, the SBA aspect of it, that's a whole separate session. But there's so many different disciplines that just doesn't benefit people of color. So when we have the access point to take advantage of that and really let people, believe that we are capable of providing products in the same categories as our counterparts, it's when we excel the most.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. And you're so right. I mean, now more than, ever before, as long as I can remember, the spotlight is on us. And so it is an opportunity to really shine. And I'd like to bring Moderator in on this as well. What products or programs have been most successful for manufacturers of color? Moderator?
Oh, thank you so much. So I have a few clients that are in the manufactured space. So I can only talk about this from what I've gleaned from their experiences. So in terms of what types of products that are programs that have been most successful, I think that looking at those that really support with funding, I think that that's probably an area where a lot of those who are trying to create products really need support. And so, I actually don't have the names, but I can put them in chat of some of the resources that my clients have been able to leverage in order to better position their products. Because one of the challenges is if you don't have the funding to really support your manufacturing, it's hard to really get out there. And so how do you use and look for those kind of resources to better position yourself? So I'll make sure I include some in chat for you.
That'd be great. That's a good segue into another question. What are some indicators that say now or later is the time for creative businesses wanting to transition back to brick and mortar? I mean, when do you know?
Before we move to the brick and mortar question, I just want to add one thing on making and manufacturing and one program or line of programming that I think has been really valuable to business owners of color. And that is the made in campaigns or the local branding campaigns. These start out as logos often, right? So you have a consumer facing product and you slap a logo on the product that says that you're made in a particular city. And it's this like very neutral foot in the door for a whole range of creative businesses, particularly those that are producing a physical product. And both in DC and Baltimore, there are publicly funded efforts made in DC and made in Baltimore that have really centered equity in their approach to building out a robust maker and manufacturer ecosystem. And so I think that is something that is really critical to invest in, lift up, and celebrate, because the first step in really supporting these businesses is creating connections between them, and then creating connections across industries. So you have a small maker business, say they're producing soap, and they're doing it in a really artisanal way. There's an opportunity to move from small batch production to a more at scale opportunity by connecting them to larger manufacturers in the region. And these local branding platforms, yes, at first glance, it seems like it's predominantly marketing, but it's really stewardship of a whole host of economic development services. So sorry to jump in on the prior question, but I just wanted to give a plug to the work that's happening in DC with the Made in DC local branding initiative.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, did you want to chime in on this next question though? Indicators that now or later is the time for creative businesses wanting to transition into the brick and mortar?
I can't speak to indicators, but what I will say is that right now we have a lot of commercial real estate that is like significantly I don't want to say undervalued, but there's an opportunity to create some curated space residency programs, particularly for communities of color. So imagine as commercial real estate turns over, if you shift some of that real estate into nonprofit structures or community land trusts, where you can actually create space residencies for very specific types of retailers, makers, folks in the creative economy. This is a way to sort of create that physical exposure at a time where you may not have foot traffic to rely on as the sole means of generating revenue. And I'll just point out that when you have a maker business coming into a commercial district, one of the things that is really exciting about that is that they can do both a mix of production on site if it's zoned accordingly, and then sell both directly to consumers at the retail location, and to a broader array of purchasers all across the country or even internationally, whether that be consumers or B2B. So just putting that out there as well.
And I'd like to ask Shelley too, as a research director, what do you think? What do you think are some of the indicators that say now or later is the time for creative businesses to transition to brick and mortar?
Yeah, I think building on what Lee was sharing, in the pre-COVID world, a lot of folks thought of the brick and mortar as the key or the heart of a business or an endeavor. Right. And then from there, they build a community, build an online presence, build a social media presence. And that right now is reversed. The heart of a business needs to be digital. It needs to be virtual. That's how you build the customer base. That's how you get in touch with people.
The whole world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then a physical location becomes an extension of that. And so it's more important than ever to really build the support and build an online presence, build that customer base before thinking about that brick and mortar location, because you're going to be relying on that virtual community to come in. As Lee was saying, we're not having the foot traffic. So really taking advantage of the virtual presence and building that as much as possible during this time before thinking about that transition is really important.
Yeah, very important. And it's a whole new world right now. So we have to pivot and do what we can. Ian, did you chime or Madier? Did either of you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I think, for me in my industry, this has kind of been where we've been in this space for, the past 10 years, right? So our business was to, take over vacant, dilapidated, blighted properties and beautify them with the corporate sector providing financial support to make a space beautiful again. As a DC native, I just want to see my city thrive. And it, bothers me to drive into areas and neighborhoods where a property would just look, abandoned for years on end, and no one really feel like they have the potential to do something about it. That's been my biggest push with, policymakers and councilmen and, the mayor's office. It's really looking at operators who have the capacity to really turn a neighborhood around. When we did, Blind Wino in 2013, there was nothing really in the Southwest neighborhood that spoke to arts and culture. And then even going back to 2011, when we activated an abandoned office, 25,000 square feet on the top of 14th and Florida Avenue. And we, again, working with the property owner, we activated a space for 30 days with Vitamin Water, who provided the financial means to improve the facility and allow us to bring some engagement to that neighborhood. And then even H Street, 2015, with David Doctor and Matt Alexander. They're great retail brokers, retail advisors. And in partnership with them, they allowed us to activate a 18,000 square foot old fashioned warehouse on 7th and 8th Street. And this is right when the street car, just was completed, but 8th Street wasn't 8th Street. Mm-hmm. So looking at that, and then, really going back to Ward 7 and Ward 8, the thought there was, there's a lot of abandoned properties and homes, and one of our organizations, the Nicholson Project, with Stephanie Reiser, that whole intent was to take an old row home that sat on 9,000 square feet right on Nicholson off of Pennsylvania and Minnesota, and we activated it as an artist residency program with an urban farm. There's a food desert in Ward 7 and Ward 8, and there's new grocery stores popping up in Capitol Hill and other parts of the city. But if, again, you have people and operators who have the capacity to activate a brick and mortar, I think the commercial real estate folks will start understanding more that there is a different way to utilize your real estate for the greater good of a community and not just for their bottom line. I mean, when you look outside, we see the amounts of revenue that comes in off of real estate. Mm-hmm. If you just chop off a small piece or a small portion and dedicate that to community arts and culture, it'll make a huge impact and a huge difference.
Yeah, that's huge. Thanks, Ian. Moderator, do you want in on this one?
Actually, I don't really have much to add to that. I think that Ian did a really good job kind of summarizing.
It really.
I'd be passionate about it. Sorry.
She said, Ian took it all. He said it all. Well, then how about this, Moderator? Could you share some ideas on how creatives can tell their story and connect with the community?
Sure. I actually get this question all the time. And what I always like to take people back first is I feel like storytelling has become a buzzword in marketing. And so we throw it around a lot, but most people really don't understand what it actually means to tell a story. And so the professor and me always like to start back to kind of explaining what storytelling is, not necessarily why it's important. I think we all know why storytelling is important, but how to actually do it. And so the core of any great story has a message, right? And so as a business owner, and as you're thinking about telling your story, the first thing you have to do is define what is the key message? What is the one message you want to communicate about your business and your brand? But with that message, you want to make sure that that message is really focused on value. So a lot of time in marketing, you hear a lot about the value proposition, right? And so the value proposition is really communicating what is it that you're ultimately providing to your customer and the value that they get from engaging with your creative services. And so when people struggle with telling their story, is usually because they don't have clarity on what's that message that they're trying to communicate about their brand and what their true value that you're offering. And so I always start there because once you understand what it is and why your customer is buying from you in the first place, then you can begin to craft your story. And so what that means is, because every story has specific sections, right? So you have the setting of the scene, the telling of what existed and how it existed prior to you coming in and offering your value. Then it becomes identifying the challenges or the conflict. So what was your customer or your customer base or your audience experiencing that was a pain point, and how do you come in and bring a solution to that problem, and you become the hero of that story. And so if you so the key to truly telling a great story is, one, identifying what is the pain point your customer has. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it's really important that you understand your customer and your audience, especially in this COVID environment, because the value in which you may have been providing in the very beginning may not be the same high priority that they need now. So part of when we talk about innovating your marketing in this space, especially after COVID, is figuring out how can you still provide or adjust your market offering in a way that meets your customer where they are, so you can continue to be that hero in their story. So when you first identify the value proposition or the value and the message that you're trying to communicate, then you can frame the story to kind of solving that problem. And so your customer or the audience of your story might be different for different needs. So we talked about the policy in, you know, the need for policy change. Like, so how do you begin to position your story for that? We talked about just, you know, your basic customer audience, you know, how you're solving your problem there. And then the other thing I talked about at the very beginning was, especially if you're just starting out and you want to create awareness, now thinking about the customer journey, and the first stage in the journey is awareness. The most important part, story that you can tell initially is your origin story or your awareness story. And so that story takes the same kind of structure and framework, but it begins to position and tell the journey of why you're doing what you're doing in the first place, which I think is very important for creatives to express their why, right? And then talk about some of the conflict and the challenges and the resolution that they were able to provide. So I think that, you know, if you're struggling with telling your story and want to understand how to better connect your story to your audience, I think the first thing is that you need to first identify who your audience is, understand the value that you're providing to them, and then be able to articulate what is the core message and how you're solving that problem. And that can be the basis of how you can begin to really truly tell your story and connect it to your community.
Love that, Professor Mathieu. Thank you. I mean, you know, that's what it's all about, connecting and getting your potential customers to buy into what you're doing and, you know, give them more of a reason to connect with you and hopefully support you. So this is so important. And as you said, just identifying what your story is and then figuring out the best possible way to tell that. So yeah, thank you for that. I'd love to hear other perspectives. How about Shelley? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't have too much to add, but I will say as a consumer in the creative sector, we rely so much on creative professionals to make sense of an experience and define a sense of community, and that need is stronger than ever. So that's all I would contribute there. And thank you to all the creative professionals out there doing that important work right now.
Yes. And Ian, you started off talking about how, you know, you're a storyteller and your company that you guys are storytellers. So we'd love to hear from you just how you guys do it and some ideas for other creatives to effectively get their story out there.
Sure. I think, you know, just to be brief, it's really just telling the story that's not being told. If it aligns with your business and who you are and what you're about, you know, we only receive a certain amount of media through multiple platforms, you know, especially, you know, television, social media. We get the same consumption, but there's a story that's not being told, and there's a reason why the story is not being told. So if you're able to tell that story specific to who you are and what your industry is, it should help, you know, create a space or a lane for people to really, you know, feel more involved or integrated into your business.
That's good.
I want to add
I was going to say, could we get Lee to chime in on this?
Yeah, one thing that I was excited to share, storytelling is actually a really big part of the way the Urban Manufacturing Alliance approaches our work. We're thinking about what are the interventions on the ground that are actually lifting up these creative businesses. And so we have to get really creative about making those programs and policies stories that people connect to as well. It can be far more powerful than a technical report to actually share the stories of how a programmatic intervention can change the lives of a business and really the lives of a community. And then along those lines, you know, as a small business, you don't have to go through this storytelling exercise alone. It's a really challenging proposition to not only build a business, but to build a narrative around it. And so I would encourage small businesses to lean on economic development professionals like the Made in DCs of the world to not only tell your story and see if you can leverage platforms like that to get your story out there, but to iterate around how that story can be shaped. And then also one of our corporate partners is Square, and they now have, if you go to their website, they have a whole storytelling campaign for Square sellers. So really looking at how you can not only use your own networks that you've taken the time to build to get your story out there, but leverage the networks that may already exist to get your story out there to a far wider audience. And so that's something that I would encourage, is get the feedback and look at other platforms for your story once you've refined it.
That's good. And so, Lee, while you're here, your thoughts on how cities and regions can take advantage of maker spaces in response to COVID and in recovery?
Yeah, this is a big question, and I'll try to be succinct. Maker spaces have been a tremendous source of innovation, pre and in the midst of this pandemic, and I think we need to shift our view of these maker spaces as not just places where hobbyists go to tinker, but rather places that provide the seeds of entrepreneurship, provide networks, provide opportunities for community building, provide opportunities for workforce development, and in the case of the development of PPE, provide the platforms for design and engineering capacity so that we can really bring products to market and products to scale. Maker spaces are a starting point, but they don't need to be the end point for these businesses. So again, coming back to the conversation we were having around commercial real estate, really thinking as we serve businesses about what the continuum of real estate needs to be, and modernizing the zoning along commercial corridors so that those that are physically producing a product in a maker space can find alternative spaces that they have full control over down the line to have a physical presence, if that makes sense for their business. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'd point out is that within maker spaces, you could access a whole array of technology, but we've also been seeing this real resurgence around garment and textile production in communities all across the country. And people aren't really talking about that in the context of advanced manufacturing or really even the creative economy. But these garment and textile producers have been at the front lines of our recovery effort in COVID, thinking about how to create masks and isolation gowns when that was not their primary line of work before. And a lot of that innovation is happening through networks of sewn trades producers, sewn trades organizations, and maker spaces are really, really key partners in that effort.
Thank you so much. And I see Shelley has something to add too. When you're speaking, she's nodding like, yes, yes. Shelley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we have a lot of folks displaced from their jobs now who are needing or wanting to explore new career opportunities. And that's going to continue as we look towards recovery. And maker spaces have the potential to help people learn and develop skills, including those that would facilitate entrepreneurialism as a creative and make that transition in some cases from, as Lee was describing, the sort of hobbyist makers into people who can rely on that to, make their living and help our economy more broadly. And the other component is to think about maker spaces as a potential hub for training and skill development around the digital skills that makers and creatives increasingly need. And to clarify, definitely not as a replacement, not that digital skills are needed instead of the arts and talents and crafts that people would be going to maker spaces to engage in, but as an essential supplement to them, so that as people make and create, they also have the skills to amplify their work and build that customer base, as we were talking about earlier, which increasingly requires digital and virtual skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, Matier, any comments on this one?
No, I don't really have much to add on this one.
Ian, how about you?
I can just speak about the makerspace and really look at it as a comparison to the food halls right now. Like food halls, there's a food hall being created, every day I feel in this area, and actually a shout out to Market 7 Food Hall, because that's the first food hall that'll be in an area that really needs that type of experience. But food halls are literally a collective of restaurants and industries, food industries that occupy the same real estate. So when we think about maker spaces and creative spaces, imagine if we had that same kind of thought process in every ward, where there was a 15, 20,000 square foot facility, maybe that the city owned or that is under DGS's portfolio, that we can say, hey, you know what, let's go ahead and turn this into a maker space. And that way the artist community and the creatives can have a physical location to do what they need to do. And I think that it's just ways that we could think differently about how we utilize real estate in our city, and that's both private sector and the city government.
I'm so glad you brought up food, because I think the analogy there are commercial kitchens, and we're seeing how public markets in cities and just city-owned real estate, as you said, Ian, can be used to not only create maker spaces, but to create those dedicated entrepreneurial hubs for specialty food producers. And there are some great examples in DC of commercial kitchens. So that could be a whole separate conversation, but they have been real anchors in the entrepreneurial ecosystem as well.
Agreed. And I'll even echo that and really put the charge back on, developers. At the end of the day, they're the ones that's controlling the real estate. So it's if a developer can receive a $20 million TIF from the city, imagine if you just took 0.5% of that and created a commercial kitchen in an area that's non-existent of that type of use. Like, you'd be amazed at the impact and the effects of that community move.
Good stuff. All right, thank you. So the creative entrepreneurial sector has adapted rapidly. Can you give us some examples of accelerated digitalization and crossovers between culture, education, or health sectors that have driven future innovation?
I mean, I guess that can, kind of just piggyback on what I was just saying, as far as, if you're an industry that, only does a specific, service, now is the time to really get into an industry that you might not be familiar with, and even partner up with other industries, again, that wants to expand their networks. I think of, going back to Lee's point about food and Espita, downtown, which is a Mexican cuisine restaurant. Now they're slinging cheesecakes and wings. And of course, me, I love my wings, but, they're changing their model up a little bit to offer something different. So when we think about different industries like, health or education, every segment, specifically in the arts and culture sector, has the ability to introduce a health and wellness component, has an ability to introduce a educational piece, whether it's just providing information or showcasing the history of what once was to what is now. And those are things that I feel can help with the digitalization of where we are going, and how we can really integrate all of those sectors into one.
It's good. Thank you. I'd like to ask everyone that same question, if they could chime in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think we've seen a lot of digital technologies created and advanced over the last several months to facilitate services that people rely on. And this goes back even pre-COVID, when we've seen, ride-sharing apps developed for ride-sharing services, and food delivery apps for food delivery services. And we see certain industries specialize as more and more needs to go digital and go remote. So we see telehealth creating platforms for really sensitive and important conversations to happen virtually. And that can be adapted to performing artists who also need to create kind of a special and intimate space to share their art. We see in the ed tech space Education, developing new ways of engaging with people over far distances. That carries over to new ways of engaging with audiences for artists and creatives. So we see these technologies emerging that are just sort of ripe for crossover into the creative spaces. And then one more I'd point to just as an emerging technology that in a lot of ways creative professionals are well suited to take on is cooperatively owned and managed digital platforms. So rather than kind of a large company owning the technology that then workers of various kinds use to be matched with customers, there's platforms and digital tools that are cooperatively owned by the workers or the professionals using them. And there's a lot of room for growth here, and creatives could potentially take advantage of that model.
Good, very good. Anyone else like to chime in? Lee, any comments on that?
Yeah, and actually, as we're talking, I see a question from one of the attendees as well around the importance or the potential of owning personal 3D printers as you think about helping to expand or grow your business. I think the advanced manufacturing technology and digitalization play not only a role in the way consumers interface with service products, but also the way that physical products get fabricated. And in many ways, ownership opportunities within making and manufacturing have been democratized, because what once required very heavy equipment investments, now with far more modest investments, you can actually start and scale your maker business by, say, purchasing a 3D printer. You can make sure that purchase makes sense by getting the training that you need at a local maker space, or tapping into some of these more technical programs on the workforce development side. There are a number of programs sort of that offer pre-apprenticeships where you can get advanced manufacturing credentials, and it's a way to sort of make sure that the investments make sense. But I don't think that, and to the question that was raised, I don't think that it has to be an either or proposition where you sort of control all of the technology and you build your business around it. You can actually use that technology for design, prototyping, working at small scales, but then look at partnerships with other larger manufacturers as you begin to scale up your product, or maybe a component part you rely upon other manufacturers as well. And so making sure that as you build out your business model, you're not trying to go at it alone. And I think that's really the message for every single one of these questions, is to build your network, build your network, build your network. And that might mean talking to businesses that are in adjacent industries. It might mean talking to policymakers when it doesn't seem directly related to your line of work, but that network will serve you well as you grow and scale.
It's good. Thank you so much. So we're going to have a poll question in a few minutes, and also a Q&A from all of the attendees. But before we get to that, I would love to ask our panelists to offer some strategies to build a creative business model that stands through a changing city and changing times. Whoever wants to go in first. Lee, while you're here, did you want to?
Oh, now you're getting at the fact that I'm a terrible multitasker as I try to answer the Q&A and live questions at the same time. Can somebody else go first?
So I would say all business models are really centered around understanding your audience or understanding your values. So I think that in order for you to, create a creative business model that stands any kind of endures any type of situation, that you have to always go back to what is the value that you're offering and to who you're offering it to, and what are the benefits that you're providing. And so if you look at any of the business model canvases, they always talk about your value proposition. They always talk about your customer. And so one of the things I will say is that the importance of any business model is centered around understanding who the customer is. And one of the things that I encounter when I work with a variety of clients is that they truly don't understand their client, their customer, or their audience on a very intimate basis to help them use that information, that data, to help allow them to pivot their service offerings and their products or services to really address the needs of their customers. So I will say that any strategy must be customer focused and customer centered. And then when you truly understand who your customer is and what how you're servicing them, then can you be able to pivot and adjust your business in a way that meets them where they are.
It's good. Really good advice. Thank you. All right. We're asking everyone the same question. So let's see who's next. Ian, how about that?
I think the strategy should really be in your intent. Some people want to do it for the money. Some people want to do it just because they love to do it, and I think that really can balance the scale. If you love what you do, then you're able to pivot and create new ways to drive your same mission, which was to deliver a service or product to a community that never heard of it or have never experienced it. And there were plenty of years, for me when I first started, the sneaker suite, I wasn't doing it for the money at all. I was spending money because I wanted to share my love of collecting sneakers with the general market that didn't understand why I was staying in line for hours at a time waiting for a pair of shoes to release. So I think it does go back to loving what you do, and understanding that if you really love what you do, then you'll just adapt, but not adapt to a point where you're trying to just make money off of a particular product or service. That to me is key.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Who else wants to take that one?
I'll jump in with kind of two strategies that I would say would come secondarily to loving what you do. And one is familiarizing yourself with technologies. They're here now and they're going to sort of increase in presence in our lives. So, learn how to share your work and find those audiences and connect with folks virtually and remotely. It's important now, and it will be important as we move forward and recover and re-enter a face-to-face in-person economy. And the second would be to think about the kind of workplace benefits that creative and independent professionals often lack. And there's a key role here for policy and policymakers to make these benefits, insurance, retirement plans, paid leave, things like that. Key role for policymakers to make these available and accessible. But while that happens and while those innovations are happening, independent professionals themselves need to think about them and ways of kind of building those into their business and their finances to ensure and bring some stability when we do hit difficult times.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we have a poll, and I'm going to read the poll question and we will go from there. Here we go. What is your primary need over the next 3 months? Finding and retaining new customers, clients, or adding new gigs or events? Enhancing my online experience like websites, social, e-commerce, or none of the above? All right, everyone's taking their time answering the question. Okay, so we're going to have some questions here. D.W. Farrell from Localite asked, Lee, how can gig makers organize for more financial stability? Examples such as worker-owned businesses, cooperatives, guilds, etc. And similarly, Indra Klein asked, with regard to the creative and gig economy, do you foresee individuals coming together and forming guild-like alliances? We're waiting for the results here.
That's a great question, and hi DW. I would say there are two ways to think about cooperative structures and alternative business models. One relates to the actual ownership of the business, and another relates to the services that businesses may be tapping into. And so I'll try to tackle both in my response. As it relates to these small businesses, many of them are looking for an exit strategy, and yet they've built these assets that communities know and love, and they're feeling vulnerable in this time of crisis. And the transition to a more cooperative worker-owned model can be a way of preserving those assets. The challenge is making sure that there is the financing and technical support available to facilitate that transition to the cooperative model. So there are some really, really good case studies right now. For example, the city of New York is investing with 2 technical assistance providers to actually help connect the dots between firms where the owner may be looking for an exit, either because they're ready to retire or because the economic climate is just too much to bear. And they're looking at the fundamentals of these businesses and exploring with either workers or an alternative purchaser, how do you preserve these assets? And so getting public agencies to invest in that TA support, and then capital providers to really look at the transition to cooperatives as something that is worthy and important for investment is really crucial on the business ownership side. The other thing I'll say, and I think I started with this at the beginning of the panel, is the vulnerability and precarity of these small businesses. And some of that relates to the fact that the cost of doing business is really, really expensive. And if we can start moving towards a model towards shared or cooperative infrastructure to support small businesses, whether that be accounting services, legal services, childcare. We don't live in a world where the majority of people are coming into these large companies. We are seeing small business or business catalyzed by small business and entrepreneurship. So to the extent that we can move towards more cooperative models for providing the support for those businesses, that would be really, I think, pivotal to making sure that businesses are more resilient down the line. Community development financial institutions can be really good homes for that sort of shared infrastructure. And so really pushing to see where can some of those back offices support live, so that each entrepreneur doesn't need to reinvent the wheel and figure out how they're going to tap into these services and how they're going to get them in a non-predatory way.
Good, thank you so much. So can everyone see the poll results there? And would you care to comment on them? Let's see. So what is your primary need over the next 3 months? Finding and retaining new customers, clients, that came in at 34%. Adding new gigs or events came in at 13%. Enhancing my online experience, like website, social, e-commerce, came in at 44%, the largest, and none of the above, 9%. So what are your comments on that? Lee, since you're right here on the screen, are we seeing Lee? Who cares to comment first?
Well, I think Go ahead, Shelley.
Go ahead, Ian.
You first.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think the most popular response is about the online experience, and goes to show the need for building digital and remote-based skills among creative professionals. So the more that kind of local policymakers can do to help build those skills, and the more that professionals themselves can come together and sort of inform one another and develop ideas together, the better, to strengthen those online skills, which will only continue to be helpful through recovery.
Awesome, thank you. Ian, since you were so polite.
Yeah, I think it's also just where we are right now. Everyone's home. There's not a lot of distractions aside from your cellular device or your laptop. So to be, to improve in that area, whether it's, e-commerce or just social media, there's always a need for improvement. And then even, if your business was more brick and mortar or physical, you've shifted to a virtual landscape or a virtual lens, because that's where everybody is, my personal opinion, like I don't want to be where everybody else is. I want to be over here so that when everybody's done with being over there, they're going to want to come back here. And I think, again, that's the strategy approach of really understanding what's happening, and not just thinking of the now, it's thinking of the future and being prepared for that. In multi-layer, it's looking at how we can introduce new industries and really utilize the ability to collaborate more now. I mean, we're seeing a lot more pop-ups, non-traditional pop-ups in fine dining and with Ben's Chili Bowl and Chef Kwame, so those are things that we really have to pay attention to. It'll only help improve our city at the end of the day.
Thank you. Madier, you see the poll. What are your comments?
Yeah, I was actually going to chime in on what Ian was saying. I think that Ian brought up a good point, the importance of now, but I think that what COVID has showed us is that we must always look at our environment and what's going on and try to, be forward thinking and not just focusing on in the moment. Because technology, the need for websites, the e-commerce, that has been around for a while, but I think that COVID was an accelerant and showed us how important for those who may not have adopted those means earlier to be to take advantage of those opportunities. And so I would say, not just looking at now, okay, now I need a website or I need to be more focused on social e-commerce. It's also being aware of what are the new technologies that are coming out that you can leverage and start to use and innovate, and always thinking about how you can incorporate technology in your innovation as you continue to grow your business, your servicing, and your offering. So I think that there's definitely an importance of providing those skills and having those knowledge and being able to do that. But I also will say, as it relates to more people focusing on the importance of being online and shifting online, is that understanding that just because you build it doesn't mean that they're going to come. And so there needs to be a strategy around how you're going to be leveraging these platforms. How are you going to be leveraging your website? You can't use your website the same way it was many years ago as a glorified business card. So you have to be able to think about a strategic approach to how you're going to actually drive people to your content that you have on your website. How are you going to be using it? Your website really should be used as a place where you're collecting that data of your customer and your audiences. So making sure that you have important analytics on your sites, that you're tracking the data. If you're using social media, making sure that your website has Google Pixel and all those other analytics, so you're able to measure the success of all of your activities. Because what you don't want to do now is, because so many people are online, it is becoming a bit of a fatigue where it's actually harder to reach people where they are, even if they're online. And so part of your strategy is going to have to be, how do you identify ways to create your own audiences in these online spaces that you can then be able to drive people to your space. So whether that's your website or your social media, et cetera, et cetera. And there's one comment I would like to comment on social media, is that it is a great platform to create awareness, especially as a startup, because it is a low barrier in terms of, requiring a lot of capital to be able to use to create awareness. However, I'm not sure if anybody had a chance to watch the new documentary on Netflix about the social dilemma, but the way that social media platforms are used now are mostly are geared towards a advertising model. So initially, when social media platforms were first established, it really is about creating networks and building those relationships, personal relationships. But for business owners that are using social media, the reality is that the people who are in your personal network aren't necessarily your customers. And so what I find where my customers who are using social media are having problems is because they're having a hard time growing their audience base around their social media accounts. And that's because we're not approaching social media the same way we approach relationship building in our own personal lives. And so social media really is about, if you're going to use it organically and not use a paid advertising model, in order for you to really grow your presence online, you're really going to have to be able to spend time doing engagement, building relationships, having conversations that's the part of social media that most people don't take advantage of and leverage. And that's the reason why a lot of their social media is not successful.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you so much. You know what? We've got less than 5 minutes and we've got all these wonderful questions. I'm just going to, I guess, go to one. In the registration, participant asked, how are those participating in gig creative economy falling short on incorporating retirement planning in financials? So whoever feels they want to comment on that one, this will be the last word.
Yeah, I can jump in here and say that I think one of the things that COVID revealed was that businesses are often hitting the ground running without a lot of the business fundamentals being nurtured and supported. And so when we talk to a lot of our service providers serving the creative economy, what they've said is they've now had to become sort of like a business therapist, really unpacking, like, was there ever a business plan? Do you have a traditional banking relationship? How have you planned for retirement? Do you have an HR manual? Have you checked the boxes so that the next time something like the Paycheck Protection Program comes around, you actually meet those eligibility requirements? And so retirement, I think, is just one of so many things that has gotten missed in the context of launching and scaling not just a creative business, but really any business. And I think part of the challenge on with respect to that particular question is that nobody really likes to talk about succession planning. Like, you know, you like to just imagine that like the next generation will take on the company, or that you'll have like a very easy way to transition out. But it's not something that people are like getting all jazzed about planning for. But I think that particularly in this moment in time where we're seeing so many closures, it's this rude awakening that that we need to talk about succession plans for businesses, and we need to really go back to the basics and support businesses from the bottom up. And I think it relates back to the question earlier on these cooperative structures and just much deeper supports for small businesses.
And Lee, this is such great information. Thank you so much. It's less than 2 minutes and it's the end. I just want to thank all of our presenters, all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Look out for this. We want you to put it on social media. We want to thank the Economic Partnership, the Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership, Think Local First D.C., Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. Of course, our wonderful Mayor Muriel Bowser. I'm your host, Angela Stribling, so honored to be with you all here today. And so thank you so much. This is great information. Have an amazing day. We want to hear your feedback. Take a minute to fill out this survey. And so thank you so much. Have a great day.